Jimmy Kimmel thought he was about to roast Melania Trump like every other night, until she stepped onto his stage, flipped the script, and turned the king of late-night mockery into the one getting destroyed. With ice-cold precision, she tore apart his years of smug jokes and cheap shots, exposing how his just comedy had secretly brainwashed millions into believing his lies, and left Jimmy Kimmel speechless, gasping for air under his own studio lights. Jimmy Kimmel Live was one of America's most popular late-night shows, where celebrities came to promote their projects, share funny stories, and trade light-hearted jokes with the host. But tonight felt different right from the start. Then Melania Trump walked out. She moved with calm, steady steps, no rush, no nervous smile plastered on her face. Jimmy stood up from his desk with that familiar big smile, the one he'd used 1,000 times before. "Melania, welcome back to the show," he said, his voice warm and playful like always. "You look fantastic as usual. Tell me, how's life at Mar-a-Lago these days? Still the most beautiful place on earth?" Melania sat down smoothly and gave a short, polite answer. "It's peaceful," she said, "very quiet compared to Washington." She smiled just enough, nothing forced. Jimmy laughed lightly and kept going, trying to keep the mood easy. "So, fashion has always been a big part of your life," he continued, leaning forward a little. "Any new favorite designers lately? Or are you just enjoying not having to dress up for cameras every single day?" Melania answered calmly, keeping her replies short and simple. The audience chuckled here and there. For a moment, it felt like the interview was going exactly the way everyone expected. Light, safe, and harmless. But then Jimmy started to move on to the next question. That's when Melania tilted her head slightly. Just a small movement, but it changed everything. Her expression stayed calm, almost soft, yet you could tell something had shifted. She looked straight at Jimmy and spoke in that same even voice, cutting right through the light mood. "Jimmy," she said, "before we keep talking about fashion and Mar-a-Lago, I want to ask you a serious question." The studio got quieter. Jimmy's smile stayed on his face, but it tightened just a bit. He gave a small nod, waiting. Melania didn't raise her voice. She didn't sound angry. She simply asked, clear and direct, "Do you really believe your audience can always tell the difference between your jokes and the actual truth?" The words landed like a quiet bomb. Jimmy let out a short laugh, the kind people use when they're caught off guard. He tried to brush it off with his usual charm. "Well, that's an interesting way to start," he said, shifting slightly in his chair. But the audience didn't laugh with him. The clapping had completely stopped. People sat still in their seats. Melania didn't wait for Jimmy to recover. She kept her voice steady and calm, like she was talking about the weather, but every word carried real weight. "You've built an entire empire on turning public figures into punchlines," she said, "night after night, joke after joke. But here's the thing, Jimmy. When you repeat those jokes hundreds of times, they stop being jokes. They start becoming truth in people's heads." The audience stayed completely quiet. No nervous laughs this time, just attention. Jimmy shifted in his chair and tried to bring back his usual easy tone. He gave a small shrug and smiled like this was still friendly banter. "Look, Melania, comedy has always lived in that space between truth and exaggeration," he said. "That's what makes it funny. We reflect what's happening. We don't report the news." He leaned back, clearly hoping that would settle things, and they could move on. But Melania wasn't done. She gave a small, polite smile, then raised her hand slightly toward the control booth. Without saying another word, the big screen behind them suddenly lit up. A short clip started playing. It was from Jimmy's show in 2024. One of those segments where he had mocked Melania's fashion choices and called her the ice queen who never smiles. The audience in the clip had laughed hard. The studio audience now watched in silence as the old jokes played out on the big monitor. The clip ended after about 30 seconds. Melania didn't interrupt it. She didn't add any comment while it ran. She just let everyone see it. When the screen went dark again, she looked straight at Jimmy and asked, still in that calm voice, "So tell me, Jimmy, was that exaggeration or was that distortion?" The question hit hard. Jimmy paused. For 2 full seconds, he didn't say anything. His mouth opened, then closed. That tiny hesitation was the first real crack. Everyone in the studio saw it. A low murmur spread through the audience. People started whispering to each other. Then a few scattered claps broke out. Not loud, but clearly leaning toward Melania. More hands joined in. The sound grew just enough to show the room was shifting. Jimmy tried to laugh it off again, but the laugh came out shorter this time. Okay, he said, raising both hands like he was surrendering. That was a few years ago. We make jokes about everybody, Melania. It's part of the job. But his voice didn't sound as confident as before. The easy rhythm he'd started the show with was already slipping away. Melania kept her eyes on Jimmy, her voice still calm, but now carrying a sharper edge. 1 time is a mistake, she said. 2 times is a coincidence. 3 times? That's a pattern, and patterns tell a story, Jimmy. Jimmy leaned forward, trying to take back control of the moment. All right, then give me specific examples, he said, his tone turning more direct. If you're going to make that kind of claim, you can't just imply things. You have to show proof. Melania gave a small nod, like she had been waiting for exactly that request. She raised her hand again toward the control booth. The big screen behind them lit up once more, this time with a fast-paced 45-second montage that had clearly been prepared ahead of time. 6 different clips played back to back, all from Jimmy's show over the past 18 months. One after another, Jimmy mocking Donald Trump's walk, then joking about Melania's accent, then laughing about Barron's height, then calling the whole family the royal reality show that won't end. The jokes came quick, the studio audience in those old clips roaring with laughter each time. The sound was crisp and loud in the current studio. The montage ended with a hard cut to black. Melania let the silence sit for just a second. Then she spoke slowly and clearly. Pattern doesn't need every single word repeated. The audience has already seen it. That was all it took. The studio erupted. Real applause broke out, loud, genuine, and stronger than anything that had happened so far. People clapped hard, some even whistled. For the first time that night, the energy in the room completely flipped. The sound rolled through the seats like a wave. Jimmy tried to speak over it. Hold on, he started, raising his voice. But the clapping drowned him out. He kept trying, gesturing with his hands, but the audience wasn't stopping. His usual quick comebacks couldn't cut through the noise. For several long seconds, Jimmy Kimmel sat there looking stunned as the applause kept going. He finally had to raise both hands and wave them, signaling for quiet like a teacher trying to settle a rowdy classroom. That moment hit hard. It was the first time all night he had visibly lost the rhythm of his own show. The applause slowly died down, but the shift in the room was obvious now. People sat straighter. They were locked in, waiting to see what would happen next. Jimmy's face had changed. The easy late-night host smile was gone. In its place was something tighter, more serious. He cleared his throat and pushed back harder this time. Assumption is not the same as proof, he said, his voice firmer. Just because people remember a few jokes doesn't mean there's some grand strategy here. Context matters. Intent matters. Melania didn't answer right away. She simply looked at him, then glanced out at the audience for a brief moment. The silence after the big applause made Jimmy's words feel smaller than he probably wanted them to. Jimmy leaned forward, his voice getting tighter as he tried to push back. My intent has always been satire, he said. We make jokes to poke fun at public figures. It's not about hurting anyone. It's just comedy. People understand that. Melania looked at him for a moment, then answered in the same calm, steady tone she had used all night. "Intent doesn't erase impact, Jimmy." The words landed heavy. The audience stayed quiet, waiting to see how he would respond. Instead of answering right away, Melania turned her body slightly toward the audience. She looked out at the rows of people and asked a simple, direct question. "Be honest with me. How many of you in this room have ever changed your opinion about a public figure, even a little, just because of a joke you heard on this show?" For a second, nothing happened. Then 3 hands went up in the front rows. Melania nodded slowly. "Please, stand up if you feel comfortable." A woman in her early 40s stood up. She was wearing a simple blue sweater and looked nervous, but she kept going. Her voice shook a little as she spoke into the quiet studio. I used to think Melania was cold and didn't care about anything," she said. "I believed that because of all the jokes I heard here, the Ice Queen stuff, the she never smiles bits. It stuck in my head. I didn't even question it until tonight." She paused, then added softly, "Hearing you talk now, it makes me feel bad that I let those jokes shape what I thought about her." Melania didn't cut her off. She didn't say a word. She just let the woman finish speaking, giving her all the space she needed. The studio went completely silent after the woman sat down. No coughing, no shifting in seats, just total, heavy quiet. Jimmy tried to smile, but it came out forced and awkward. His eyes showed the discomfort clearly, a mix of surprise and frustration. He gave a short laugh that didn't sound real and started to speak. "Well, that's one person's experience," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "We can't take one story and turn it into a trend." But the damage was done. The woman's honest words hung in the air like smoke. Several other people in the audience were nodding slowly. A few more looked uncomfortable, like they were rethinking things they had laughed at before. Melania turned back to Jimmy. Her expression hadn't changed much, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," she said quietly. "Words on this stage reach millions of people every night. When the jokes paint the same picture over and over, they stop being funny. They start shaping reality for people who trust your show." Jimmy opened his mouth to reply, but for a moment nothing came out. He glanced at the audience, then back at Melania. The easy confidence he usually carried was cracking more with every passing second. Jimmy took a deep breath and tried one last time to spread the blame. "Accountability goes both ways, Melania," he said. "Public figures, the media, all of us, we all share responsibility for the narratives out there." Melania looked at him for a moment, then answered clearly and without raising her voice. "Shared responsibility doesn't remove individual responsibility, Jimmy." She let the words sit. Then she stopped talking completely. She turned her head and looked straight into the main camera. Not at Jimmy, not at the audience, but directly into the lens that was broadcasting live to millions of homes across the country. The studio grew even quieter. Melania reached into the inside pocket of her vest and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She opened it slowly, her hands steady. Everyone's eyes were locked on her. She began to read in a calm, clear voice. October 12th, 2024. Melania looks like she'd rather be anywhere else, preferably back in Slovenia counting her money. She paused for half a second, then continued. February 3rd, 2025. The only thing colder than Melania's fashion is her personality. Another short pause. March 18th, 2025. Baron's growing up fast. Must be all that ice in his veins from Mom. She read each line exactly as Jimmy had said them on his show, including the dates and times. No emotion in her voice, just the facts. When she finished, she folded the paper neatly and slipped it back into her pocket. Then she looked directly at Jimmy again. "I'm not asking for a public apology," she said. "I'm only asking you to admit, right here on live television, that when you make jokes about me or my family, You are shaping how millions of people see us, and that comes with real responsibility." The studio fell into dead silence. Jimmy stared at her. 4 long seconds passed. 4 seconds that felt like forever on live TV. He didn't move. He didn't smile. He didn't try to joke his way out. The camera stayed tight on his face as the weight of her words pressed down on him. Then the audience exploded. Applause burst out loud and strong, rolling through the seats like thunder. A few people shouted, "Yes!" from the back rows. More joined in. The clapping grew faster, harder, more united. It wasn't polite anymore. It was real. Jimmy swallowed hard. His throat moved visibly. When he finally spoke, his voice came out rough and a little hoarse. "That is a fair point." It was the first time all night he had openly admitted anything. The words hung in the air. The applause swelled even louder for a few more seconds before slowly settling down. Jimmy sat there, looking smaller in his chair than he had at the start of the show. For the first time, the late-night host who always had the last laugh didn't have one. Melania didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply gave one small nod, as if she had gotten exactly what she came for. Jimmy sat still for a moment, then forced himself back into host mode. His voice sounded different now, flatter, more careful, missing the usual bounce. "Well, Melania, thank you for coming on the show tonight," he said. "It was definitely a conversation we won't forget anytime soon." He gave a small nod, trying to wrap things up like he always did. Melania stood up slowly. She extended her hand across the desk. Jimmy stood too and shook it. The handshake was polite and brief, but Melania didn't smile. Her face stayed calm and composed the entire time. No victory grin, no extra words. Just quiet dignity. She turned and began walking off the stage. As she took her first few steps, the big screen behind Jimmy suddenly lit up again. Another short montage started playing, a quick collection of every major time Jimmy had mocked Melania over the past 2 years. The jokes flashed one after another, crisp and loud. At the very end, bold white text appeared across the screen. "Accountability starts here." The audience reacted instantly, gasps mixed with murmurs. Some people pointed at the screen. Melania had almost reached the edge of the stage when she stopped. She turned around one last time, facing the entire studio audience directly. The lights caught her perfectly. She looked straight out at them and spoke in a clear, steady voice, loud enough for every microphone to catch. "I don't need Jimmy to change his show," she said. "I just need his audience to remember one thing. Laughter is never allowed to replace the truth." That was it. Short, simple, final. The studio exploded. The entire audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. The applause thundered through the room, loud, sustained, and real. People clapped hard, some cheering, others shouting in agreement. The sound rolled like a wave that wouldn't stop. Cameras panned across rows of people on their feet, many nodding strongly. Jimmy remained alone on stage. He stood behind his desk, trying to keep a professional smile on his face. But it looked stiff and awkward. His eyes showed the strain. The applause kept going as Melania gave one final nod to the crowd and walked off the stage completely. The lights began to dim slowly. The big screen faded to black. Jimmy stood there under the fading spotlight, the roar of the audience still filling the studio. He gave a small wave, but it felt forced. The easy, confident late-night host from the beginning of the show was gone. In his place stood a man who had just been forced to face something he couldn't joke his way out of. The moment didn't end with noise. It ended with clarity, because that night, in a brightly lit studio in front of millions, one woman had proven that you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to be loud to shift the balance. Sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that stays calm and speaks the truth anyway. And long after the applause finally died down, that truth would keep echoing.